What if you made a decision that would change the lives of the people you love forever? A choice made in a moment of despair, leaving behind scars that would take years to heal. This is the story of Michael, a man who, crushed by the weight of debt and a profound sense of failure, made the worst decision of his life. He abandoned his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children when they needed him the most. Michael didn't realize that by walking away from his family, he wasn't just escaping financial problems. He was creating a wound that would haunt him for years to come. On the other side, Sarah, a woman of unwavering strength and determination, didn't have time to crumble. With 2 children to raise and no money in her pocket, she faced the impossible, one day at a time. Michael was an ordinary man, the kind who believed that hard work was enough to keep a family afloat. He grew up in Austin, Texas, in a modest neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names and life was simple but honest. At 25, he met Sarah, a kind-hearted, determined young woman with big dreams. They married soon after and built a modest home in the suburbs. The birth of their 2 children, Ethan and Emily, brought joy and a heavy dose of responsibility. But like many young parents, Michael and Sarah soon found themselves struggling. Bills piled up, Michael's paycheck from his factory job couldn't keep up with the rising expenses, and Sarah, who had stopped working to care for the children, felt trapped in a cycle of diapers, tears, and sleepless nights. The arguments started subtly, small disputes about money, groceries, and unpaid bills. Over time, those small fights turned into loud, bitter exchanges in the quiet hours of the night while Ethan and Emily slept in the next room. The weight of responsibility began to suffocate Michael. No matter how hard he worked, it felt like it would never be enough. Sarah, on the other hand, carried a quiet strength. Despite the tears she shed in the bathroom and the nights she skipped meals so her children could eat, she never showed weakness in front of them. Her love for Ethan and Emily was her anchor. Even when the electricity was cut off or when she had to heat water on the stove for their baths, Sarah managed to smile. She held on to the fragile belief that somehow everything would be okay. While Sarah faced the storm head-on, Michael sank deeper into his own thoughts. He began coming home later, avoiding Sarah's eyes, speaking less, and withdrawing into himself. A dangerous idea started to take root in his mind. What if I just leave? What if I walk away and start over somewhere else? This was the fragile reality of a family on the edge of collapse. The weight of failure, the shadow of abandonment, and the fragility of their bond hovered like a storm cloud above them. And it was on one silent night, under the dim glow of a lamp, that Michael finally made a decision that would change their lives forever. The night was cold in Austin, Texas. The wind whispered through the cracks in the windows, and the heavy silence of the house felt like an omen. Michael sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper in front of him. Beside him sat an old, worn-out suitcase, half-packed with a few clothes and personal belongings. The dim light of a flickering lamp illuminated his trembling hands as he held a pen. In that moment, everything felt both simple and impossible. Walking out the door, leaving behind the weight of unpaid bills, unmet expectations, and the suffocating feeling of failure. But with every breath, the gravity of his decision pulled him deeper into doubt. He thought of Sarah, likely asleep in the next room, her face marked by exhaustion. He thought of Ethan, who always ran to greet him at the door after work, and Emily, whose wide, innocent eyes always searched for safety in him. I can't do this anymore. I'm a failure as a husband, as a father. They'll be better off without me, Michael whispered under his breath. He scribbled a few words on the paper, short and cold. Sarah, forgive me. I can't do this anymore. Take care of the kids. Goodbye. In the next room, Sarah stirred awake at the faint sound of the front door closing softly. For a brief moment, she thought it was just the wind, but deep down, something felt wrong. She got up, walked to the kitchen and froze when she saw the suitcase missing and the note on the table. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the paper and read Michael's final words. The silence of the house became deafening, and the coldness in her chest felt paralyzing. In the children's room, Ethan and Emily slept peacefully, unaware that their father had just walked out of their lives. Outside, Michael walked down the dimly lit street, his shoulders hunched, his face etched with regret and fear. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay. That night marked the beginning of two very different journeys, one of guilt, remorse, and regret, and another of resilience, survival, and unwavering determination. As Sarah wiped the tears from her face, one thing was clear. She could no longer rely on Michael. She was alone now, with two children to raise, and she had no choice but to move forward. The morning after Michael left felt colder than any winter morning Sarah had ever experienced. The sun barely crept through the thin curtains of their modest home, casting faint light on a reality she couldn't escape. Her world was different now, quieter, heavier. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the empty space where Michael used to sleep. The crumpled note lay on the nightstand beside her. The sound of little feet shuffling across the wooden floor broke her trance. "Where's Daddy, Mommy?" Ethan asked, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Beside him, little Emily clutched her worn-out teddy bear. Sarah knelt down, pulling them both into her arms. "Daddy had to go away, but we're going to be okay. I promise." Her voice trembled, but her words carried a determination she didn't yet fully feel. The days that followed were some of the hardest Sarah had ever faced. The bills didn't stop arriving, the fridge grew emptier, and the weight of keeping everything together threatened to crush her spirit. Sarah began looking for work, but with two small children to care for and no one to watch them, her options were limited. After weeks of searching, she managed to find a part-time job cleaning tables at a small cafe downtown. The pay was meager, barely enough to cover groceries and keep the lights on, but it was something. Sarah would wake up before dawn, prepare breakfast for Ethan and Emily, drop them off at a neighbor's house, and work long hours scrubbing floors and wiping tables. Every night, when she returned home exhausted and sore, her children greeted her with bright smiles. Those smiles were her anchor, her reason to keep going. One evening, after another exhausting day at the cafe, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at a bag of flour and a carton of eggs. Baking had always been her comfort zone, her little escape from reality. On a whim, she decided to bake a cake. It wasn't fancy, just a simple vanilla cake with icing. The next day, Sarah brought a slice of that cake to the cafe. The owner tasted it and was immediately impressed. "Sarah, you have a gift. Why don't you sell these here?" With the little money she had left, Sarah bought enough ingredients to bake 2 cakes. She placed them at the cafe's counter, wrapped carefully in plastic with handwritten price tags. By the end of the day, both cakes had sold. That small victory lit a fire in Sarah. Night after night, after putting the kids to bed, she would stay up baking cakes and cookies. Her little hobby turned into regular orders, and soon people began asking for her sweets for birthdays, weddings, and celebrations. A year later, Sarah had saved enough money to rent a small shop in downtown Austin. She named it Sweet Beginnings, a tribute to her journey from rock bottom to hope. The bakery became a cozy refuge, filled with the warm aroma of vanilla and cinnamon, and decorated with photos of Ethan and Emily on the walls. Ethan, now older, helped at the counter while Emily decorated cookies with her tiny hands and bright imagination. Sarah hadn't just survived, she had thrived. She had turned pain into purpose, despair into determination, and a broken life into something beautiful. On one quiet evening, as Sarah closed the bakery's doors after a long day, she looked up at the stars and whispered, "We made it." But while Sarah was rebuilding her life, somewhere on the other side of Austin, Michael was beginning to confront his own regrets and the weight of the choices he had made. The first few months after Michael walked away from his family felt like a blurry haze. He had found a small, cheap motel room in a town an hour away from Austin, working odd jobs just to keep a roof over his head and food in his stomach. Each day was a cycle of exhaustion, guilt, and silence. At first he told himself he'd made the right choice. They're better off without me. I was only dragging them down. But those words started to lose their meaning as the weeks turned into months and the months into years. Michael's days were mechanical. He worked during the day, ate alone at night, and fell asleep staring at the cracked ceiling above him. In those silent moments, images of Sarah's tired but determined face, Ethan's bright smile, and Emily's innocent eyes would invade his mind. No matter how far he had tried to run, he couldn't escape them. His loneliness became a shadow that followed him everywhere. He had no one to talk to, no one to care for, and no one to share his burdens with. The escape he had hoped for turned into a prison of his own making. One day, while sitting in a corner booth of a worn-out diner, Michael picked up a crumpled local newspaper. A headline caught his eye: "From Struggle to Sweet Success, the story behind Sweet Beginnings Bakery." His heart stopped. Right there, printed in black and white, was a photo of Sarah standing proudly behind the counter of a charming little bakery, with Ethan and Emily smiling beside her. They had grown so much. Ethan was nearly a teenager, and Emily had the same warm eyes he remembered so vividly. Tears welled up in Michael's eyes as he read the article. Sarah had built a life from nothing. She had given their children stability, love, and hope. All without him. In that moment, regret crashed over him like a tidal wave. He realized that walking away hadn't made their lives better. It had only made his emptier. I need to see them, even if they don't forgive me, even if they hate me. I need to tell them I'm sorry. Michael folded the newspaper carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of direction, a purpose. The journey back to Austin would be long, and the road to forgiveness even longer. But for Michael, taking the first step felt like the most important thing he had done in a very long time. Meanwhile, in the warm glow of the Sweet Beginnings Bakery, Sarah had no idea that her past was walking steadily back into her life. The golden afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling streets of Austin. The smell of fresh pastries and warm vanilla drifted from the open door of Sweet Beginnings Bakery. Inside, Sarah was wiping down the counter while Ethan counted the day's earnings, and Emily carefully arranged sugar cookies on a display tray. It was an ordinary day, peaceful, predictable, safe, but outside, standing on the other side of the street, Michael hesitated. His hands trembled, clutching a worn newspaper clipping of Sarah's article, now creased and faded from being folded and unfolded so many times. His heart pounded in his chest and his breath felt shallow. They're happy now. They don't need me. What if I ruin everything by walking through that door? But regret had carried him long enough. With trembling steps, he crossed the street and opened the bakery door. A soft bell above the entrance chimed, and the air filled with the sweet scent of cinnamon and sugar. Sarah looked up from the counter. Her eyes met Michael's, and the air seemed to freeze. Time folded in on itself as years of silence, guilt, and heartbreak filled the space between them. Ethan noticed the shift in his mother's expression and turned to see the man standing at the door, his brow furrowed and his hands instinctively clenched. Emily, still too young to fully understand, simply stared at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. Michael took a hesitant step forward. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." His words hung in the air, raw and fragile. Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her grip on the cloth in her hand tightened as tears welled up in her eyes. "You left us, Michael. You left us when we needed you the most." Her voice was steady, but the hurt was unmistakable. Michael nodded, his head hanging low. "I know, and I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. I don't expect forgiveness, Sarah. I had to see you. I had to tell you how deeply sorry I am." For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the street outside and the faint hum of the bakery's refrigerator filled the silence. Finally, Sarah spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't undo what happened, Michael. But you're here now." Ethan's face softened, and Emily took a hesitant step closer to the man who was, by blood, her father. Forgiveness wouldn't happen overnight, and redemption isn't earned in a single moment. But in that warm little bakery, with the scent of vanilla hanging in the air, a door was opened, just a crack, to something resembling hope. Sometimes the hardest journeys start with two simple words. "I'm sorry." Some wounds never fully heal, but that doesn't mean they can't be mended. The story of Michael, Sarah, Ethan, and Emily isn't about perfection or easy forgiveness. It's about choices, consequences, and the courage to face our mistakes. Michael learned that running away from problems doesn't erase them. The weight of guilt and regret only grows heavier with time. Sarah showed us that strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every single time you do. Her resilience didn't just save her. It gave her children a future filled with hope and stability. Ethan and Emily carried the scars of their father's absence, but they also carried the light of their mother's love. They remind us that healing is possible, even when it feels out of reach. This story isn't just about regret, it's about redemption. It's about finding the courage to face the people you've hurt and seeking forgiveness, even when it feels impossible. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, it's never too late to do the right thing. Sometimes the smallest step towards reconciliation can lead to the greatest transformation. So ask yourself, is there someone you need to forgive? Or someone you need to say, "I'm sorry" to? Start today. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or a personal experience. Your voice matters, and your story could inspire someone else. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more powerful stories like this one. And most importantly, if there's someone you need to forgive, or someone you owe an apology to, don't wait. Sometimes the hardest words to say are the ones that matter the most. I'm sorry. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.